Okay, what I want to do today is to talk a little bit about some of the evidence that Darwin used to support his idea of change of species, or i.e. evolution. And I have put these into various categories. That's not a good marker. And I am changing the presentation that's in the chapter. I'm doing it in a slightly different order. So here's the categories. The first is anatomy, and it's referred to as comparative anatomy because we're going to look at several different species and their structures. Second category is fossil evidence, and also evidence about the age of the Earth. Third category is looking at development or embryology, and so we call that comparative embryology because we're looking at the development of several different species. A fourth category is what is called biogeography, and that's just a fancy term for the trying to understand the distribution of living species across the world. And the last category is a category that Darwin obviously couldn't talk about, but that is the molecular types of evidence that scientists point to, and they talk about proteins and DNA. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow each of these categories. I'm going to talk about comparative anatomy first, and then fossils and so on. And I will be referring to some of the diagrams that are in the chapter that I asked you to read. And this is chapter 16.3. So it actually is a section of the chapter that I handed out in class the other day. So this should be the third handout. So as I mentioned, sometimes I'm going to be referring to what Darwin said, and maybe even quoting him. Other times I'll be adding more. All right, so comparative anatomy. Darwin compared among vertebrates. He looked at the forelimb of mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, and even amphibians, and actually looked at several different mammals, so humans versus bats even. And it was known, the bones of these organisms were all known. He looked at the forelimbs, so the front limb, and noticed for all of them that the bones, the same bones more or less, were present in each of those organisms. And I do want you to know the bones, so I'm going to list them here. So we have the humerus, which is the bone that supports the forearm. The upper arm. The forearm is supported by two smaller bones, which are the radius and ulna. The wrist bones are referred to as carpals. The bones of the hand itself are called metacarpals. And the bones that support the fingers are called digits. And Darwin noticed or commented that even though the function of each of these limbs was different in these different organisms. For example, the forelimb of the bat is for gliding or flying. In the case of humans, we use the hand for grasping, birds for flight, fish for rudders, and so on. So he used a sort of a logical argument, at least for his point of view. And he says, what can be more curious than that the hand of a man for grasping, that of a mole for digging, the leg of the horse, paddle of the porpoise, and the wing of the bat should all be constructed on the same pattern and should include the bones in the same relative pattern. So Darwin is saying that doesn't it make more sense to say that these same bones are present in all of those organisms because they were inherited from a common ancestor than to explain them as saying that they were created by special creation. So in your handout there should be a figure. I don't know, I don't have that. Well, if you will look at figure 16-14 on page 468 of the textbook or the handout, you'll notice the relative appearance of these bones among those different organisms. Evolutionary biologists refer to structures that are inherited from a common ancestor. They refer to those structures as homologous. So the set of bones that are present in the vertebrates, regardless of the function, they are all present because they were inherited, according to Darwin, inherited from a common ancestor. So we refer to them as homologous structures. Now, another argument that Darwin brought up in his book, The Origin of Species, that falls under the category of anatomy, is the presence of structures that are called vestigial. So these are structures that don't have a function in the organism that they're present in, that we see them in. And so their function is puzzling. So Darwin proposed that those structures are present because they were necessary in a common ancestor. Some past ancestor had those structures and they were useful, and they're simply inherited, so to speak, along the way. So the word is vestigial, V-E-S-T-I-G-A-L. And again, these are structures that are useless to the owner or have no known function. So we can talk about some examples. In humans, the wisdom teeth are teeth that we don't need. Some people don't even have wisdom teeth. They're probably, according to Darwin, they are inherited from past ancestors where the jaws were larger, and over time our jaws have become smaller, and we no longer really have a lot of room for those structures. Another organ that sometimes mentioned as being vestigial is the appendix. The appendix could have an important function in the past, may not be as important in the present. Snakes, another example. Some snakes still have the presence of the hip bone as well as some small leg bones, even though they don't have limbs. Okay, so that's what I want you to know about the first category of evidence for evolution, and pretty much this is all from Darwin, present in his book.